A young girl offered her last piece of bread to a stranger who was running from a storm, and perhaps something darker. Years later, this man, now a millionaire, knelt before her with an envelope in his hands. "You saved me once," he said, his voice trembling. "Now I have an offer you cannot refuse." What was in that envelope? And why did it feel like her entire life was about to change? What happens when the past comes back? Not to haunt you, but to give you a chance to rewrite your future. The stranger she helped was not just anyone. He knew a truth about her life that even she did not know. What could he possibly want from her now? Keep watching to find out how one act of kindness turned into the opportunity of a lifetime. Once Lila had everything: a family who loved her, a warm home, and a bright future ahead. But all of it disappeared in an instant. Her uncle's deceit destroyed her family's trust and finances, leaving Lila to bear the weight of their anger and blame. Abandoned and alone, she was forced to navigate a world that seemed to have no place for her. Now she walks the streets of a bustling city, invisible to the world. Every step she takes reminds her of the life she once had. The warmth of her past feels like a distant dream, replaced by the cold reality of survival. She has learned to keep her head down and her heart guarded, whispering to herself, "People only help when they want something in return." One rainy night, as she huddled in the shadows, a fleeting glance at a man stopped her. His face, though unfamiliar, stirred something deep within her. A connection she couldn't explain. Little did she know, a decision she made long ago was about to come full circle, setting her on a path that would change her life forever. Why had this man reappeared? And what was he offering that she could not refuse? Lila crouched in the shadows of the narrow alley, her thin jacket soaked from the relentless rain. The chill of the night seeped into her bones, but her eyes stayed sharp, scanning every flicker of movement around her. Then she heard it. A low, urgent voice followed by a muffled cry. Her heart tightened as she turned toward the sound. Just a few steps away, two men cornered a figure against the wall, their whispers laced with threat. "Empty your pockets. Now," one of the muggers growled, his hand hovering dangerously close to his waistband. The man being cornered trembled, his voice barely audible as he pleaded, "Please, I do not have anything. Just let me go." Lila could have walked away. She had enough problems of her own. Why risk her safety for someone else? But the fear in the man's voice tugged at something deep within her. She clenched her fists, battling with the weight of her conscience. Finally, she made a decision. "Hey!" she called out, her voice echoing through the alley. The men turned toward her, startled. She stepped forward, picking up a jagged piece of glass from the ground. Her pulse raced, but her voice remained steady. "Leave him alone, or you will regret it." The two muggers exchanged glances, their smirks fading into scowls. "Stay out of this, girl," one of them warned, stepping toward her. "I said leave," she snapped, raising the broken glass with unwavering determination. "You want trouble? I can give you plenty." Her defiance caught them off guard. They hesitated, their confidence shaken by her unexpected boldness. Finally, one of them muttered, "Forget it. Let's go." With one last glare, they disappeared into the darkness. Lila exhaled, the adrenaline still coursing through her. She turned to the man, who stared at her in disbelief. "Go," she urged, her voice softer now, "before they come back." The man hesitated, his hands trembling as he steadied himself. Why did you do that?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Because nobody else would," she replied simply. Then, without waiting for a response, she turned and disappeared back into the shadows, leaving him to ponder the kindness of a stranger. Michael stood there, drenched and trembling, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. His eyes darted to Lila, the girl who had just saved him. "I do not know how to thank you," he managed, his voice shaking with a mix of relief and disbelief. "Please let me give you something." He reached into his pocket, fumbling for a few bills, but Lila shook her head firmly. "Keep it," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Then, as if on instinct, she pulled a loaf of bread from her bag, her only possession of worth. "You need this more than I do," she added, pressing it into his hands. Michael stared at the bread, stunned. "Why would you do this?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Because someone should," Lila replied softly. But as she turned away, a pang of doubt crept into her mind. Had she done the right thing? That bread had to last her the next 2 days. Yet, something inside her refused to regret the decision. Michael stood frozen, the loaf of bread clutched tightly in his hands, as if it were more precious than gold. His lips quivered, but no words came out. He looked at Lila one last time, his eyes filled with gratitude that words could never express. Then, without another sound, he turned and disappeared into the rain-soaked night. Lila watched him go, her heart unexpectedly heavy. She had done her part, but why did she feel as though something was left undone? Was her small act of kindness enough to make a difference? Her thoughts swirled with uncertainty, but she knew one thing for sure. Life on the streets left no room for second guesses. As the rain fell harder, she tugged her jacket closer, pushing the moment from her mind. Survival demanded her full attention, and the fight was far from over. Lila moved through the bustling streets, her eyes scanning the crowd out of habit. Years of surviving had trained her to notice everything. The subtle shifts in body language, the tension in strangers' steps. But today, something unfamiliar caught her attention. A man stood on the corner, his tailored suit pressed to perfection. His confident stance and polished shoes marked him as someone far removed from her world. Yet there was something about his face. Lila's chest tightened as the memory surfaced. It was him, the man from that rainy alley all those years ago. Her heart raced and she considered turning away. But curiosity rooted her in place. What could he possibly want now? And why did he look so different? She shook her head, the years of struggle hardening her instinct to trust. Still, a strange pull urged her to stay and find out. The man approached her, his every step deliberate and steady. "Lila," he said, his voice low yet commanding. She stared at him, her fists clenched by her sides. "You saved my life once," he continued, a flicker of emotion in his otherwise composed demeanor. "I have never forgotten it." Her lips curled into a faint smirk. "I remember. You were just a man running from trouble. Now look at you." Michael nodded, acknowledging the irony. "Yes, my life has changed, but not without its cost." He paused, his gaze steady. "I owe everything to that night. To you." Lila tilted her head, skepticism etched across her face. "What do you want from me now?" Michael smiled faintly. "Not what you think. I want to return the favor, but I have a feeling you might not trust me." Her laughter was dry, almost bitter. "Trust is not something I give freely anymore." "Then let me earn it," Michael replied, his tone softening. "I am not the man I was, but I owe you the chance to see what that night has led to." Lila crossed her arms, the tension between them palpable. "Fine," she said, curiosity pushing past her defenses. "But if this is some game, I walk away." Michael nodded. "You will not regret it." But as he turned, a shadow of uncertainty flickered in his eyes, leaving Lila wondering what price she might pay for indulging her curiosity. Michael's tone was steady, but his words carried a weight Lila could not ignore. I have an offer for you, he began, his eyes locking onto hers. I want you to work with me as a consultant for my homeless initiative. Lila blinked, trying to process the unexpected proposal. A consultant? For what exactly? Her voice carried an edge of suspicion. You understand these streets better than anyone, Michael explained, his voice calm but determined. Who better to help design programs for people struggling to survive? Her first instinct was to laugh, but she held back. And what makes you think I would want to help you? What makes you think I'd trust you? Michael nodded as if he expected the resistance. I know you do not trust easily, but this is not just about me. It is about giving others the chance you never had. Lila's eyes narrowed. What is the catch? Michael hesitated for a moment before answering. You will have to revisit your past. The betrayal. The pain. Everything you have worked so hard to bury. His words hit her like a blow, the memories threatening to surface. And you think that is supposed to make me say yes? No, he admitted. But I hope you will see that this is not about the past. It is about redemption for both of us. Lila's fists clenched at her sides. Redemption, she echoed, her voice laced with disbelief. You think money can fix everything? This is not about money, Michael replied, his tone unwavering. It is about making a difference. It is about giving others what you gave me. A chance to survive. She shook her head, the words stirring old wounds she had tried to forget. Why now? Why after all this time? Michael met her gaze, his expression unflinching. Because I owe you. And because I know you can make a difference. Lila's laughter was bitter. You have no idea what I have been through. You have no idea what it is like to lose everything. Michael stepped closer, his voice soft but firm. You are wrong. I do know. And I know what it is like to fight your way back. That is why I need you. For a moment, silence hung between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Lila wanted to walk away, but something in Michael's eyes stopped her. What is in it for you? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Closure, he admitted, and a chance to finally do something that matters. Lila exhaled slowly, the weight of his words settling over her. She did not trust him, not fully. But a part of her could not help wondering, what if he was right? What if this was her chance to reclaim everything she had lost? Michael's words hit Lila like a storm she was not prepared for. The mention of her past felt like tearing open an old wound. She clenched her fists, her voice sharp as she snapped, I have made it this far on my own. I do not need your charity. Her defenses, built so high over the years, flared to protect her from the flood of emotions threatening to break through. Shame for her circumstances, anger at the betrayal that led her here, and a desperate need to keep herself safe from further pain surged within her. Michael's calmness only made her more uneasy. This is not about charity. It is about opportunity, he said softly, but his words did little to ease her. You do not know me, she hissed, her eyes narrowing. You do not know what it took to survive out here. You are right, Michael admitted, his tone steady but firm. But I see someone who has more strength than she realizes. You shut the world out to survive, but maybe it is time to let it back in. His offer challenged everything she believed about survival. For years, she had convinced herself that trusting no one was the only way to endure. Now his words stirred something she could not yet name, hope, fear, or both. Lila stormed away, her steps echoing through the empty street. Yet, no matter how far she walked, Michael's voice stayed with her. What if this is my only chance? The question lingered, refusing to fade. She stopped at a corner, leaning against the cold brick wall, her breathing heavy. Memories she had buried long ago rose unbidden. Her family's betrayal. The broken promises. The night she was cast out, left to fend for herself. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to force the memories back into the shadows where they belonged. But the truth refused to be silenced. She had not just been running from her family's betrayal. She had been running from herself, from the pain, from the guilt, from the part of her that still longed for connection. As the cold wind bit at her skin, she whispered to herself, "What if he is right? What if shutting everyone out is not the only way?" But the fear of being hurt again clawed at her resolve. Could she really take the risk? Could she open herself to a world that had done nothing but break her? The battle raged within her, unresolved. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to wonder, not just about survival, but about what it might mean to truly live again. Michael watched as Lila walked away, her steps quick and determined, but her shoulders weighed down by unspoken thoughts. Standing there, his voice dropped to a whisper, as if he was speaking to the wind. "You are stronger than you think. That is why I need you." His words hung in the air, trailing after her like a shadow. For Lila, the line between gratitude and manipulation had never felt so thin. Her mind churned with questions. Was he genuine, or was this just another power game disguised as an opportunity? She could not ignore the unease creeping into her chest. As she glanced back over her shoulder, Michael remained rooted in place, his expression unreadable. Something about his calm confidence unsettled her. Was this a lifeline being thrown her way, or a chain meant to pull her under? The tension in her heart grew heavier with every step. Huddled in the corner of her makeshift shelter, Lila pulled her worn jacket tighter around her shoulders. The night air was sharp, biting at her skin as Michael's words echoed in her mind. "You are stronger than you think. That is why I need you." She stared at the ground, her thoughts spiraling. Was this the chance she had been waiting for? Or was it just another trap wrapped in kind words? Her past was screaming at her to be cautious, warning her not to trust so easily. Yet there was a whisper, a faint, hopeful voice, that urged her to consider the possibility of something better. Her family's betrayal loomed large in her mind, a constant reminder of the pain that comes with trust. But what if walking away from Michael's offer meant shutting the door on her only chance to escape the streets? The stakes had never felt higher, and the weight of her decision pressed down on her like a heavy fog. As the city lights flickered in the distance, Lila whispered to herself, "Is survival enough? Or is it time to fight for something more?" She knew that this choice could change everything, but the risk terrified her. Could she afford to take it? Or could she afford not to? Michael's steps echoed against the pavement as he followed Lila through the winding city streets. Her pace quickened, her shoulders stiff with resistance. She cast a sharp glance back, her eyes filled with mistrust. "Why are you following me?" she snapped, her voice sharp and defensive. Michael raised his hand slightly, his expression calm but resolute. "Because I know what you are going through," he said softly, his tone disarming. Lila scoffed, pulling her worn jacket tighter. "You think you understand? You have no idea." Michael took a step closer, his voice unwavering. "I do. More than you realize." She spun around, her gaze piercing. "Why do you care so much? What do you want from me?" His words were simple, yet they lingered in the air like a lifeline. "I see someone who deserves a chance. That is all." But Lila's walls were built high. Every step she took away from him was a step away from what felt like charity. She hated the idea of needing anyone. Yet, as she walked further, the question gnawed at her mind. Why does he care so much? Lila's steps slowed as Michael's voice broke the silence. "I was abandoned too." She froze, her back to him, unwilling to face the man who had just struck a chord too deep to ignore. My family left me to fend for myself, he continued, his tone quieter now, edged with vulnerability. I know what it feels like to be invisible, to think no one cares whether you make it or not. Lila turned slowly, her eyes narrowing as if trying to decipher his sincerity. And what? You expect me to believe you were just like me? Michael met her gaze, unflinching. I do not expect anything, but it is the truth. The streets, the hunger, the cold, they teach you things no one else can. They taught me resilience. And I see that same strength in you. Her defenses wavered just for a moment. His story mirrored her own struggles, peeling back the layers of her hardened heart. But suspicion lingered. If that is true, why did you get to escape? Why am I still here? Michael's voice softened further. Because someone gave me a chance. And now I am trying to do the same for you. For the first time in years, Lila felt a flicker of curiosity, an ember of hope. Could it really be that simple? Was he just like her? The thought stayed with her, refusing to fade. Michael's voice softened as his gaze drifted to the ground, his fingers clutching the memory of that night as if it were tangible. I remember the rain, he began, his words deliberate and heavy with emotion. I thought it was going to be the end for me. I had nothing left, no strength, no hope. Lila stood silent, her arms crossed defensively, but she could not ignore the crack in his voice. You didn't just hand me bread that night, Michael continued, his eyes lifting to meet hers. You gave me something I didn't even know I needed, a reason to believe there was still good in the world. That someone cared. Her breath hitched, but she masked it with skepticism. It was just bread, she muttered, her voice hard. To you maybe, Michael replied, his voice steady. But to me it was survival. It was hope. Lila's gaze faltered. The weight of his words stirred something within her, but the armor she had built over the years held firm. Trusting his sincerity felt dangerous, yet she could not shake the honesty in his eyes. Michael's steps slowed as they approached the shelter. The faint hum of laughter and conversations reached Lila before they entered. Her brow furrowed, confusion swirling in her mind. Inside, the room was alive with energy, children chasing each other, parents sharing smiles, and the faint sound of music playing in the background. Lila's eyes darted around, taking in the warmth that contrasted so sharply with the cold she had come to know. This is what I wanted to show you, Michael said gently, gesturing to the bustling room. It's not about me, it's about them. A young boy ran past, clutching a toy airplane with a grin that stretched from ear to ear. Lila's heart clenched. She wanted to turn away, to block out the sight of a world she had convinced herself she would never belong to. You built this? She asked quietly, her voice laced with disbelief. Michael nodded. Every person here has a story. They've all been where we've been, Lila. And now they're rebuilding their lives. Her gaze lingered on a mother holding her child close, the tenderness in their embrace stirring memories of her own past. The thought whispered in her mind, uninvited and persistent, maybe I could belong here too. Lila leaned against the worn table, her voice hesitant as she spoke. If we focus on the alleys near the main square, more people can find the food stations. Michael's eyes lit up. That is brilliant, Lila. You see things the rest of us miss. She blinked, caught off guard by his praise. I just know how people move when they're trying to stay invisible. And that, Michael said with a knowing smile, is exactly why we need you. For the first time in years, Lila felt her words hold weight. She began sharing more, each idea adding to the initiative's progress. Slowly, the walls she had built around herself started to crack, as a glimmer of pride filled the spaces once ruled by doubt. Michael cleared his throat, his expression shifting from encouraging to uneasy. "There is something you need to know," he began cautiously. Lila stiffened, sensing the gravity of his tone. "What is it?" "The next phase involves partnering with your family's company," he said, his words deliberate and careful. Her face hardened instantly, the mention of her family ripping open old wounds. "Why them? Why now?" Michael sighed. "Because they control resources that could take this initiative to the next level. I thought you should hear it from me." "Do you have any idea what they did to me?" she snapped, her voice breaking under the weight of betrayal. "Yes," Michael replied softly, "and that is why I believe this could be your chance to face them on your terms." Lila's trust in him wavered. She stared at him, torn between the past she had buried and the future he promised. Lila's hands trembled as she sat alone, staring into the dim light that barely illuminated her shelter. The memory crashed over her like a wave she could not escape. Her uncle's voice echoed in her mind. Calm, persuasive, and so convincing. She had trusted him, believed his promises of security and wealth. Instead, he had orchestrated a scam that left her family penniless. Her father had looked at her with disappointment, her mother's eyes filled with silent accusations. "You brought him into our lives," they had said, their words sharp enough to carve through her heart. As the memory tightened its grip, she whispered, "I don't think I can face them." Her voice cracked under the weight of her grief, shame, and the unbearable sense of abandonment. The past she had fought so hard to bury was now clawing its way to the surface, threatening to pull her under once more. Michael's voice was steady but compassionate. "You do not have to forgive them," he said, his gaze unwavering. "But confronting your past might finally set you free." Lila looked away, the words cutting through her defenses. "Free?" she scoffed bitterly. "There's no freedom in opening old wounds." Michael's expression softened. "You are stronger than you think, Lila. You have already survived what most people never could. But carrying this weight forever, it is not survival. It is punishment." His words planted a seed of doubt, leaving her torn between fear and hope. Could facing the people who had destroyed her family really bring her peace? As the night deepened, the choice loomed larger in her mind. Her heart tugged her toward the opportunity to help others, yet the shadows of betrayal whispered warnings in her ear. Lila felt trapped at a crossroads, the stakes higher than ever. The question lingered. Was this the path to healing, or a risk that could break her again? The night was unusually quiet, leaving Lila alone with her thoughts. She replayed the faces she had seen at the shelter, the weary mother with 2 children clinging to her sides, the elderly man with trembling hands, and the boy who smiled despite wearing clothes 2 sizes too big. Each one carried scars from the streets, yet there was a spark in their eyes, a determination to rebuild what life had torn apart. "They are stronger than me," Lila murmured, her fingers tracing the frayed edges of her blanket. But the thought would not leave her. If they could rebuild their lives, could she not try too? For the first time in years, a faint flicker of hope stirred within her. It was fragile like a candle in the wind, but it was there. She whispered to herself, maybe I can try." As dawn broke, Lila stood outside Michael's office, her hands shoved deep into her coat pockets. The city buzzed around her, oblivious to the storm brewing within. Her heart raced as doubt crept in. Could she trust him? Could she face her past? "I could just walk away," she thought, her feet rooted to the spot. But the faces from the shelter flashed in her mind, their resilience now a silent encouragement. Taking a deep breath, she muttered, "If I am going to do this, I will do it on my terms." With trembling hands, she pushed the door open, stepping into the unknown. It was not confidence driving her, but the faintest belief that maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something new. Lila sat in the dimly lit corner of the office, her eyes scanning the documents spread across the desk. As she read, a single name stopped her cold. It was her uncle's name, scrawled across legal records tied to Michael's past. She froze, her breath hitching. "This cannot be true," she whispered, her voice trembling. Her hands shook as the pieces of a cruel puzzle started to fall into place. The same uncle who had destroyed her life had also left Michael's family in ruins. Images of her childhood flashed before her eyes. Her uncle's promises, the wealth he had flaunted, and then the moment it all came crashing down. The betrayal that left her on the streets had connected her to Michael in ways she could never have imagined. Her voice broke as she muttered, "How could one act of kindness bring me here, to this moment of shared pain?" The room spun with the weight of the revelation. Her act of saving a stranger had led her to this. A tangled history of loss, anger, and unspoken truths. Michael stood silently in front of her, his expression calm yet haunted. When he finally spoke, his words shattered the fragile trust they had built. "I knew who you were from the moment you saved me," he began, his voice steady but laden with emotion. "I wanted to thank you for saving my life, but I also wanted justice." Lila's heart sank. "Justice?" she repeated, her voice barely audible. He nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Your uncle destroyed my family. He left us with nothing. I lost my parents because of him. When I realized who you were, I thought this was my chance to face the past." His words pierced her like a dagger. She stepped back, her defenses rising. "So this was all a setup? Was anything real? Or was it just your way of getting revenge?" Michael sighed deeply, his voice softening. "At first maybe it was. But then I saw who you are now, not who your family was. You are nothing like him, Lila. You are better." Her mind raced. Could she believe him? Could she trust the man who had concealed so much? The weight of his confession pressed down on her, leaving her questioning everything. Her voice broke the silence. "How can I know this is not just another betrayal?" Michael stepped closer, his tone resolute. "Because this is not about vengeance anymore. It is about redemption for both of us. You gave me a second chance when no one else would. Let me give you the same." The words lingered in the air, heavy with uncertainty. Lila's heart wavered between anger and hope, unsure if she could take the risk of trusting him again. Michael's voice was steady, yet there was an undeniable edge as he laid out his plan. "We need to expose the truth," he began, his piercing eyes meeting Lila's. "Your uncle's crimes ruined countless lives, including mine. The world deserves to know." Lila sat motionless, her heart racing. The words hung heavy in the air. "The truth will set everyone free," Michael continued, his tone softening. "But it won't be easy." She bit her lip, wrestling with the weight of it all. Her family had fallen apart because of her uncle's greed. But this was something more. This was justice, sharp, unrelenting, and deeply personal. "Michael, if we do this," she faltered, her voice breaking, "it could destroy the only family I have left." His expression didn't waver. "I know this is not easy for you," he admitted. "But think of the people he hurt. Think of the lives he shattered." The room grew silent, her thoughts drowning out everything else. The moral burden pressed down on her. Could she align herself with Michael's mission, knowing the devastation it would cause? Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Am I doing this for you? For them? Or for myself?" The question lingered unanswered as the reality of the plan began to take shape. The tension between them was almost unbearable. Michael's resolve was unwavering, but Lila's mind was a storm of uncertainty. "You don't understand," she snapped. "This isn't just about my uncle. It's about everyone else, my cousins, my aunts. They'll suffer too. Michael's voice was calm but firm. Lila, this isn't just about your family. It's about doing what's right. If we let him get away with this, we're allowing more harm to happen. Her thoughts spiraled. The faces of her estranged family flashed before her eyes. She remembered the betrayal, the rejection, the nights spent wondering why no one came to help her. But there were innocent people caught in the crossfire, people who had no part in her uncle's greed. Michael, she said, her voice cracking. What if exposing him hurts more people than it helps? Michael stepped closer, his tone softening. Sometimes the right thing is also the hardest thing. I won't force you to do this, Lila. But ask yourself, can you live with letting the truth stay hidden? The stakes had never been higher. Lila felt the walls closing in, the weight of her decision suffocating her. If she supported Michael's plan, it could mean the end of her remaining family ties. But if she walked away, could she live with herself? Her thoughts raced as the pressure mounted. Do I owe this to you, to the people he hurt, or to myself? The question burned in her chest, unanswered, as the reality of her choice loomed before her. Michael's voice cut through the tense air, louder than he intended. You are not angry at me, Lila. You are angry at yourself, he said, his tone sharp but filled with a hint of pain. For all these years you stayed silent, pretending it was not your problem. But deep down you know it is. Lila's hands trembled at her sides, her face flushed with fury. You think I had a choice? She lashed out, her voice cracking. You do not know what it feels like to lose everything, to have no one. Michael's jaw clenched, but he did not back down. And you think I do not? He shouted, his voice finally breaking. You saved me once, Lila. Do you think I forgot what it felt like to be thrown away? That night I thought I was worth nothing. Just like you feel now. The words stung, and Lila could not stop the tears welling in her eyes. This is not about me, she whispered, her voice barely audible. It is about you. Your revenge. Your anger. Michael stepped closer, his expression softening. This is about truth, Lila. About justice. And yes, it is painful. But running away from it will not make it any less real. Her breathing was shallow, the weight of his words crushing her chest. The room fell silent, leaving only the sound of their heavy breaths and raw emotions hanging in the air. Lila sat alone in the dim room, her mind spiraling back into the past. The memories came uninvited, sharp and relentless. She could hear her uncle's voice, calm and manipulative, as he convinced her parents to trust him with everything. She could still see the moment her family lost it all. Their home, their dignity, their hope. And then came her father's voice, loud and filled with disappointment. You are nothing but a failure. A disappointment. The words echoed in her head, tearing open scars she thought had healed. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table as another memory surged forward. She saw her uncle, smiling as he walked away, leaving her family in ruins. She remembered the looks of shame and blame her parents gave her, as if it had been her fault. The tears came without warning, streaming down her face as she whispered into the emptiness. Why did they turn their backs on me? I did everything I could. I tried to fix it. But no answer came. Only the haunting reminder of how she had been cast out, left to fend for herself. Her chest tightened as the weight of those memories crushed her, forcing her to confront the fears she had buried for years. She whispered to herself, almost as if pleading, I am not that person anymore. I cannot be. But even as she said it, the doubts lingered, refusing to let her go. Michael's voice softened as he spoke, his gaze steady and unflinching. Do you know what it feels like to be abandoned? To wake up one day and realize that the people who were supposed to love you have disappeared without a word. Lila's eyes flickered with recognition, but she said nothing. Michael continued, his voice trembling slightly. I was 10 when my parents left. One day they were there, and the next I was just a kid with a suitcase and nowhere to go. I thought it was my fault. I thought maybe if I had been better, they would have stayed. The words hit her like a wave, stirring memories she had tried so hard to bury. Michael's voice grew firmer. You and I, we are not so different, Lila. We have both been betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect us. But you saved me once without even knowing it. That night, when you gave me that bread, it was the first time I felt seen. Like maybe I mattered. Lila swallowed hard, her walls beginning to crack. For the first time, she saw herself in his pain. She realized that they were connected, not just by tragedy, but by the resilience that had kept them both alive. Lila sat in the stillness of the night, her hands trembling as she stared at the ground. Her voice was barely above a whisper as she finally admitted, I have been running. From everything. From my family, from my past, from myself. Michael stayed silent, letting her words fill the space between them. She clenched her fists, her voice growing steadier. I told myself that it was easier this way. That if I kept moving, the pain would not catch up to me. But it did. It always does. Tears slid down her face as she took a shaky breath. I was afraid. Afraid that if I stopped, I would break. That the weight of everything would crush me. Michael leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. It is not about avoiding the pain, Lila. It is about facing it. You have to confront it to heal. She nodded slowly, his words sinking in. Maybe it is time, she whispered, more to herself than to him. Maybe it is time to stop running. For the first time, she felt a sliver of relief. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, she was willing to take the first step. The battle was far from over, but she was ready to fight. Lila sat in silence, her thoughts swirling like a storm. Why should I forgive them? She asked, her voice heavy with frustration. Michael met her gaze, his tone calm but firm. Because holding on to this anger is not justice, Lila. It is a weight. It will only keep dragging you down. She clenched her fists, the memories of betrayal and pain tightening her chest. Forgiving them feels like letting them win, she murmured, her voice barely audible. Michael leaned closer, his words deliberate. Forgiveness is not about them. It is about freeing yourself. It is about breaking the chains they left behind. Her heart wrestled with the truth in his words. She closed her eyes, her voice trembling. Letting go does not mean forgetting. But maybe it is the only way to move forward. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a life beyond the shadow of her past. Dawn broke, casting a soft glow through the window as Lila stood beside Michael, a newfound determination in her eyes. We will do this, she said firmly, her voice steady. But we will do it the right way. No destruction, only justice. Michael nodded, pride flickering in his expression. This is your decision, Lila. I am just here to support you. She looked at him, gratitude softening her features. I cannot keep running. It is time to stand and fight, not out of anger but out of hope. As they began planning, Lila felt a transformation within her. She was no longer the broken girl scavenging for survival. She was a woman reclaiming her life, determined to make a difference. Her voice carried strength as she spoke. This is not just for me. It is for everyone who has felt powerless. If I can rise, so can they. Michael placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice low and steady. You are not just surviving anymore, Lila. You are leading. For the first time, she allowed herself a small smile. This was not the end, it was a beginning. Together they stepped into the unknown, ready to rewrite their story. Lila stood in the dimly lit room, her hands trembling at her sides. Her uncle's presence loomed before her, a stark reminder of the life she had lost. Gathering every ounce of courage, she broke the silence. "You stole everything from us," she said, her voice steady but lined with pain. Her uncle glanced away, his shoulders tense. "It wasn't that simple, Lila. There were circumstances." "No," she interrupted, her tone sharper now. "You made choices. Choices that destroyed our family. Choices that left us with nothing." He sighed, leaning back, his voice heavy with deflection. "I did what I thought was best at the time. I never meant for it to turn out this way." Lila's eyes narrowed, her anger finally rising to the surface. "Stop pretending you were a victim. You knew exactly what you were doing. You left us to fend for ourselves while you walked away with everything." For the first time, her uncle's mask slipped, revealing a flicker of regret. "I can't change the past," he muttered, his voice faltering. "No, you can't," Lila said firmly. "But you can face the consequences." Her uncle's tone shifted, his voice pleading now. "Lila, I know I've hurt you. I know I've done wrong. But please, if you can find it in your heart to forgive me." Lila froze, her emotions swirling in a storm of anger and confusion. Forgiveness? After everything he had done? The idea felt impossible. Yet, deep inside, she recognized the weight of her decision. "You want forgiveness?" she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "Do you have any idea what that word means? Forgiveness doesn't erase what you've done. It doesn't undo the damage." Her uncle lowered his head, guilt etched into his features. "I just want a chance to make things right," he whispered. Lila's thoughts raced. Revenge would be easy. It would be satisfying in the moment. But what would it change? Nothing. Taking a deep breath, she made her decision. "Fine," she said, her voice cold yet steady. "You want to make things right? Start by contributing to Michael's initiative. Help rebuild the lives you destroyed. That's the only way you'll ever find redemption." Her uncle blinked in surprise, then slowly nodded. "I'll do it," he said quietly. Lila turned to leave, her steps heavy but purposeful. For the first time, she felt the weight of her anger begin to lift. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a start. And for now, that was enough. Lila sat across from her uncle, the weight of years of pain filling the silence between them. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was calm. "This isn't for you, it's for me," she said, the words carrying a sense of finality. Her uncle looked down, unable to meet her gaze. "I know I don't deserve it, Lila. I have no excuse for what I've done," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Lila nodded, her expression unwavering. "Forgiveness doesn't erase what you did. It doesn't change the past. But I can't keep carrying this anger. It's eating away at me, and I refuse to let it define me anymore." Her uncle glanced up, his eyes glistening with unspoken regret. I'm sorry," he stammered, the words faltering as though they were foreign to him. "I'm not doing this for you," she repeated, her voice stronger now. "I'm doing this because I need to move forward. Holding on to this pain doesn't bring me peace. Letting go does." For the first time, Lila felt a sense of relief, like a heavy burden was finally lifting. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. A step toward reclaiming her life and breaking free from the shadow of her past. Michael stood in the center of the shelter, his voice echoing with pride. "You know what it's like to feel invisible," he said, turning to Lila. "That's why you're the perfect person for this." Lila nodded, her determination etched across her face. "I don't want anyone to feel as lost as I did," she replied. "If I can help even one person find hope again, then everything I've been through will mean something. Her days at the shelter were filled with purpose. From organizing food drives to counseling those who walked through the doors, Lila poured her heart into the work. Each story she heard reminded her of her own journey, and she used those memories to connect with others on a deeper level. One evening, Michael approached her as she sat reviewing plans for a new program. "You've transformed this place, Lila," he said. "Your story inspires everyone here." Lila smiled, her heart full. "It's not just my story, Michael. It's all of ours. Every person who walks through these doors carries something with them. I'm just helping them find a way to turn their pain into strength." Her journey from despair to empowerment wasn't just her victory. It was a beacon of hope for those who needed it most. Lila had found her purpose, and in doing so, she had rebuilt not just her life, but the lives of countless others. Lila sat in the living room, her parents across from her, their expressions heavy with regret. Her mother broke the silence, her voice trembling. "We didn't see your strength before, but we see it now," she admitted tearfully. Lila took a deep breath, her emotions swirling. "It took losing everything to find out who I really am," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. Her father, usually stoic, leaned forward. "We failed you, Lila. We let our own shame blind us to what you were going through," he confessed, his eyes glistening with tears. Lila paused, the weight of their words sinking in. "I'm not the same person I was," she replied. "But if we're going to move forward, it has to be as equals. No more silence. No more pretending." Her mother reached out, her hand trembling. "We want to rebuild what we lost. If you'll let us." The reunion was bittersweet, a mixture of old wounds and new beginnings. But for the first time, Lila felt a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to being a family again. Michael stood in the doorway of the shelter, watching Lila as she spoke with a young woman who had just arrived. He approached quietly, his voice soft but filled with meaning. "You saved me, Lila. Not once, but twice." Lila turned to face him, surprised by the sincerity in his tone. "Twice?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. Michael smiled faintly. "The day you handed me that loaf of bread, you gave me hope when I had none. And now you've taught me something I never thought I'd understand, the power of forgiveness." Lila looked at him, her eyes reflecting the journey they had shared. "I couldn't have done it alone. You pushed me to face what I was running from." Michael shook his head. "You found that strength on your own. I just reminded you it was there." Their bond, forged through shared pain and growth, felt unbreakable. In that quiet moment, surrounded by the lives they had both worked to change, they realized how far they had come and how much further they could go. Lila stood at the entrance of the shelter, the morning sunlight casting a warm glow over the bustling activity inside. Volunteers moved with purpose, and the sounds of laughter and conversation filled the air. "This is where I'm meant to be," she reflected, her heart swelling with gratitude. Michael joined her, his expression one of quiet pride. "You've turned this place into more than a shelter. It's a home for people who thought they'd never have one again." Lila nodded, her gaze sweeping over the room. "It's not just about providing a roof. It's about showing people that they matter, that their stories aren't over." A young boy ran past them, his laughter echoing through the hallway. Lila smiled, her thoughts drifting back to her own journey. "I was broken when I came here," she admitted. "But now, feel whole, ready to face whatever comes next." As she walked into the shelter, her steps were filled with purpose. The once broken girl had become a beacon of strength and resilience, her story a testament to the power of hope, forgiveness, and new beginnings. What would you do with a second chance? Share your thoughts and join us in making a difference today.